So at the beginning of last month, at the beginning of the year, I turned 50 years old. And I'm looking back on 40 plus years of collecting toys. Toys from the 70s, toys from the 80s, 90s, all the way up. And I have certain anecdotes about things that I've done in my collecting. Now, I don't have quick access to my collection to drag all this stuff out and hold it up. So if I cut to any photos in this video, they're going to be from various websites, and I'll try to credit them as I go. I bought toys in the 70s. I remember having some of the Evel Knievel toys. I remember having some of the $6 Million Man toys. You know, so these are Evel Knievel's about yay tall, $6 Million Man's about yay tall. Although I did have some 4-inch $6 Million Man toys, but I wouldn't really call those collections. I had a few. It wasn't until Star Wars came out in 1977 and its Kenner toy line came out in 1978 because they didn't know the movie was going to be a success, so they didn't have anything ready. Many people have talked about that before. The empty box, the early bird set. I won't go into that. But it wasn't until the Star Wars toys by Kenner that I really began to buy into, actually literally buy into, that mindset of collect them all. There were gaps in my collection though. For instance, let's talk about the die-cast vehicles for Star Wars. Now I had collected little die-cast cars and things. I remember having the Lotus Esprit that turned into a submarine from The Spy Who Loved Me. I remember having a little Batmobile from the 1960s show, and I had a little weird metal and plastic spider copter for Spider-Man. The rotors on top were a web, and the landing gear were little red plastic spider legs, which were very brittle and broke way too easily. But it was the Star Wars die-cast collection that really kicked me off on loving the metal and plastic combos of toys. Now, I didn't have every single one of the Star Wars Kenner die-cast vehicles at first, but I know what I did have was the X-Wing Fighter, number 1, the Land Speeder, which had Luke and 3PO built into it. Years later, I realized they're sitting on the wrong sides.
There's a droid on the scanner, dead ahead. Might be our little R2 unit. Hit the accelerator.
So I set out to correct that. But I had to buy another one anyway because A, I think my windshield was missing, and B, the vertical thruster was kind of crooked to one side because crawling around on the floor playing with my toys, I had actually put my knee and all my weight on the thing and kind of bent it. So when I bought a better one years later, I did take the old messed up one and I broke Luke and 3PO out and put them on the correct side so they would be movie accurate in that one. I had the Star Destroyer, very cool, loved the Star Destroyer, and it had that sliding hatch underneath, and you could take out the little teeny tiny plastic Rebel Blockade Runner, which we did not yet know was going to be named the Tantive 4. That didn't happen until the radio dramas came out, written by Brian Daley. Then I had the white TIE Fighter. I did not yet have the Darth Vader TIE Fighter. The white TIE Fighter, the straight-winged one, the one with the vertical solar panels, nobody would do this nowadays, but the one that I had the little plastic plugs on the wings, on the solar panels, that went into the metal piece of the cockpit sphere. And it actually said in the instructions that if your wings became loose, you should take a pair of pliers and crimp down the edges of the metal to make them pinch onto the white plastic better. So imagine how damaged mine were with my 7-8-year-old hands trying to use a pair of pliers on this tiny toy, scrubbing the paint off, warping the metal. Yeah, they told you to mess your toys up back in the 70s. Nobody knew this stuff was going to be worth money someday. Nobody dreamed of that. So I know I had those 4. Years go by, years go by, years go by. After I graduated college, and first with some of my graduation money, and then after I got a job, because I was still living with my parents, but I kind of had, this liquid income and no bills to spend it on, I set out to try to complete the few gaps in my Star Wars collection. Number one, I wanted a Yak Face action figure. Number two, from the Droids collection, I had every figure from Droids and Ewoks. Got them for 99 cents each at a KB Toys in Huntsville, Alabama. And the girl didn't even count them right. I mean, they didn't have scanners for barcodes back then. She just literally went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and rang me up 10 of them at 99 cents. And there were actually 11 in the stack. So I got one of them for free, but I never found at retail R2 and 3PO in the droid style. So around the time that I got out of college, there was no eBay, there was no internet, but there was mail order. And I got in a mail order catalog, I think it's called Toy Shop, maybe Toy Fair, but that doesn't seem right. I want to say it was Toy Shop. And through Toy Shop, I found certain dealers that I like to deal with, including a guy in Indiana named Jeff Freeman, who ran a place called Falcon's Hangar. But he didn't spell it right. He didn't spell it hangar like an aircraft hangar or a spacecraft hangar with an A. He spelled it hanger, and we always pictured it being like a clothes hanger with the Millennium Falcon clipped onto it hanging in your closet. And in this catalog, I would occasionally find cool pieces that I needed. That's how I found a Yak Face. That's how I found the Droids R2 and 3PO. And started piecing together these little things that I had missed when they were originally coming out. Another good resource for filling in the gaps was flea markets. In college, I had dated a girl that lived in Huntsville, and I had passed this place. We had gone to it, actually, the Limestone Flea Market that I would pass on the way into Huntsville. And even after she and I were no longer dating, I would still go up there occasionally. Got to talking to a seller named Wayne Golden, I believe his name was, and I bought a lot of stuff from him over the years. One day I went in and he had the white TIE Bomber from the diecast collection, the rarest diecast vehicle, and he wanted a certain amount for it, and it was triple digits. And I said, oh, that's more than I think I want to pay. Also, while I was there that day, I noticed that he had some Death Star stuff, and I asked him, did he have the little plastic rope swing to the Kenner Death Star playset? Now, I had that, but mine had broken just from normal active play. And he said, yeah, but I could get as much for that one little rope swing as I could get for a complete Death Star, so he wasn't going to sell it just by itself. So I dithered around and I counted my money, and the next time I went up there, I said, I will pay that price you're asking for the TIE Bomber if you will throw in the rope swing to the Death Star. And he did. We made the sale, so then I had the TIE Bomber for my collection, which was really, really cool. Another day, browsing around, looking at stuff at places like flea markets and comic book shops, I think it was at a local comic book shop, I found just the cockpit insert for the Darth Vader TIE Fighter. Now, that was identical to the one on the white TIE Fighter that I had, and I loved that little piece. It was like an ejection pod, and for some reason, the white TIE didn't have a TIE pilot inside of it. It had Vader inside of it. So they just reused that piece when they actually made the Vader TIE Fighter. I would use that stuff for everything. Matter of fact, there was a villain for $6 Million Man called Maskatron, which got a lot of playtime with my Star Wars collection. Again, it was a Kenner toy. He had this claw arm, and that cockpit insert could fit perfectly in that claw arm, and I would pretend that like he was a gigantic robot out there with all the spaceships and everything, and the guy could pilot it from that claw, and if needed to, then you would hit the spring load and eject that claw off, and the pilot would escape. Also, I would use it for a slightly smaller giant robot because he had a hatch on his back and you could hide his masks inside. I would put a Jawa in there, like a Jawa was driving him. It was a giant battle mech for a Jawa to drive. So yeah, a lot of crossover in my playtime as a kid. So I'm at this comic shop and I'm looking at this little tiny gray version of the ejection seat from the TIE Fighter. I had the white one at home and I thought, I know what this is. I don't have the toy that this goes to, but I'm going to buy this. I'm going to see if I can find the rest of the ship for cheap because it's missing this piece. And lo and behold, would you believe the next issue of Toy Shop was selling the Vader die-cast TIE Fighter with the curved wings and the gray and the cockpit. The only thing it was missing was the thing I'd already bought at the comic book shop for $1 or something. And so I got the ship really cheap and put the piece in it that it needed. And I've always called that straighting to an inside draw. So I tracked down some other things like the die-cast Y-Wing fighter, a die-cast Millennium Falcon. I was missing the radar dish, and I took a model kit that I'd already botched of like a lunar lander, and I took just the radar dish off of it, cut it down to the right shape, and put that in there, and never did buy another Falcon with a better radar dish to my knowledge. So that's still probably something I need to shore up in my collection. And I wound up getting, you know, the little twin pod cloud car and the little snow speeder, and one by one I had the entire collection of the Kenner diecast vehicles. Or so I thought for many years. Now, in the past couple of years, there's been a big resurgence in nostalgia for the 5-point of articulation design of the classic Kenner Star Wars figures. And you see these companies like Reaction and Super 7, and they've taken things like prototype Kenner figures for the Alien movie line that never got produced, and they've actually made them. And then they parlayed that into sculpting their own designs. I knew that there had been a line proposed and sculpted in prototype form for the movie The Dark Crystal. Matter of fact, I had actually talked to a guy that owns a lot of the prototypes, and he was selling some of them, and it was just way too rich for my blood. But I was always like, that would have been such a cool toy line to own. Then they actually made a Reaction version of them with all new sculpts, and they were, you know, even better likenesses of the movie characters, if you ask me, than those old prototypes were. So I very happily bought a lot of those and turned it into a short film, as I had done with my Kenner Star Wars figures at one point. I had done a movie called Whoever Dies with the Most Toys Wins. So I did a very similar thing, posing just the Reaction figures and the one Chamberlain by NECA or NECA, I never know how to pronounce it.
Stay and friend, prophecy caused all this trouble.
The prophecy didn't say anything about this.
Prophets don't know everything.
So I'd done this little video and I posted it on YouTube. And then I got in a group on Facebook called Dream Fasting and shared it with them. And in being involved with that group and seeing their posts come up, I learned a very, very interesting factoid about the original Dark Crystal movie. One of the really cool posts that someone shared in the group, and I forgot who it was now, but you can see on the graphic who the original finder of this piece of information was a bunch of photos showing the movie frame and then what the puppet looked like just laying on a table, and a nice close-up of the scientist Skeksis robot eye. And what they had used when they built the puppet was the Kenner Darth Vader TIE Fighter cockpit sphere. Now, parenthetically, what makes that even more bizarre is the fact that when they made the Age of Resistance miniseries on Netflix, the sequel-prequel to The Dark Crystal, the scientist character is now voiced by Mark Hamill. But the thing I didn't like about the graphic was they kept showing a picture of the white Kenner TIE Fighter instead of the Darth Vader one. When clearly it's the color of the Vader one, and you can even see the little, like at the top and bottom of it, how it attaches to the puppet. These little black pieces coming out of the cockpit sphere. The Vader tie differed from the white tie. Remember I talked about the white tie having the post that went into the body? The Vader tie had a plastic post coming out of the metal cockpit sphere that went into holes on the wings. And that looked a little bit more like the one that was attached to the puppet. So in chatting about this and in saying that in posts where people would share that graphic over and over and say, it's not the white TIE Fighter, it's the Vader TIE Fighter, somebody pointed out to me something I didn't know. There was a variant of the white TIE Fighter that had the post coming out of the center that went into holes on the wings. Completely different attachment system, and if mine had had that, I wouldn't have been messing it up with those pliers all those years. So of course, I put it into my saved searches on eBay, and I watched them come up and come up and come up, and it was always the wrong one, or it was way too pricey. And then one day, in the same email, there were two hits. It was like, here's the thing you're looking for, and also, you might be interested in this. Somebody selling one wing with a visible hole through the center, and somebody else selling the cockpit with the post coming out, and one wing with a hole through the center. Both of them were Buy It Now auctions. Now, they've arrived within one day of each other. Got this one yesterday, got this one today. So, let's dig into these. I think I know which one this is because I was watching the tracking numbers and everything. This should be the solar panel by itself. There we go. One solar panel with a hole all the way through it. All right. And then this one should be a little bit easier to get into. It's an envelope inside of an envelope. How bizarre. This is the other solar panel with a hole all the way through it, and the cockpit ball with the posts protruding. Boom. There we go. A little white TIE fighter. It just needs a pilot sphere there in the back. And all of this from the Dark Crystal conversation that led me to learn about a Star Wars item that I didn't know existed back in the 70s. So, there you go. Thank you to the folks at the Dream Fasting page on Facebook, and to the fine folks at eBay, and the weird odds that both of those would show up at the same time. Thank you for watching.